Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Mission Matters Business Podcast, your source for all things business. My name is Adam Torres. You can follow me on Instagram at AskAdamTorres. Keep up with my book releases, book tour schedule, signings, all that other good stuff. Always love to connect with you there. And as always, if you'd like to apply to become a co-author of one of my upcoming books, just head on over to the website, missionmatters.com, and click on Become an Author to apply. All right, so today is a very special episode. So this is part of a multi-part series that we're putting out, and this is where we have today Keith Herman on the line. I'll start off by giving you a little bit of Keith's bio, and then we're going to do a deep dive into Keith's new book. So it's called Disruption Out of a Box, an Entrepreneur's Guide to Success. First off, Keith, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Oh, man. So I'll tell you, I am excited and pumped to get into this book. You've had me up all weekend reading it and dissecting it and taking notes, and I don't do that often. I'm not going to lie. Let me just, for the listeners that aren't familiar with your work, I'm going to start out with your bio just so they have a little bit of your background, and then we'll go from there. So first off, Keith is an entrepreneur and the founder of IPA Equities. During his career, he's owned, scaled, and successfully exited more than 50 SMEs, including 10 startups across sectors of technology and finance, media, and real estate. Throughout these businesses, he's raised more than $500 million and has participated in more than $2 billion in transactions. And additionally, he's partnered with more than 200 tech companies to establish credibility and attract capital, increase brand awareness, and form strategic partnerships for enterprise scaling. As a global thought leader, he is highly sought after to serve on advisory boards as a business growth expert and as a keynote speaker. Audiences include Fortune 100 and 500 companies, prominent founders, C-level executives, VC and PE firms, family offices, and more. He's also a contributor to many publications and sits as a judge for technology startup pitch competitions alongside noteworthy VCs and PE firms. Woo, Keith, that is a breathful. I'm excited. Let's get into this.
Okay.
So first thing first, I have to ask, I know myself along with many of your peers have been bugging you to write this book for years now. I think I've known you going on 5 years now. And so how do you feel? It's done.
I feel great. It's certainly a huge accomplishment writing a book. My hat's off to any person who's even tried to write a book. It's an experience. Let's put it that way. Anybody who finishes, it's like finishing a marathon.
So what prompted you? Meaning, I know, and we're going to get into the book contents, but first I have to get into your thought process here, because it was like, obviously you're always a busy guy, traveling, doing other things, speaking, and all kinds of stuff. So when you come back up on my radar, I'm like, what's going on with Keith? And when you told me you had a book done, I'm like, whoa, this is a big deal. So what prompted the book?
Well, for many years now, as you know, many people have been asking me to share my stories, put it into a book and share, not just stories, but, some advice about growing businesses and how I've been able to do a lot of different things. And, I was thinking to myself, there clearly is a method to the madness here, but I've never really put it down on paper, and it would be great to share with people, especially in challenging times, because that's really where it all started. It's from challenging times, and having the fortitude to stick with something and see it all the way through and get incredible results. In fact, results that are far greater than what even I had thought. And so I thought, why not do it? I've been very involved in giving back in a lot of different ways. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to put it in a book. I'll put it out there for people who are interested. And if it helps a couple of people, terrific.
So I think, first off, I think it's going to help more than a couple people. I think it's a great book, and I did read it cover to cover, and I read it. It was going to be read in one sitting. I didn't, unbeknownst to me, right? I didn't plan that. I woke up and I was like, oh, let me start this book. I've got some interviews coming up. I know Keith, I know it's going to be good. I ate breakfast, and then after breakfast, I pulled out my phone, and before I knew it, it was 4 p.m. I had a meeting coming up, and I'm like, oh shoot, I haven't done anything today. I haven't eaten lunch. I haven't done anything. Like, I couldn't put it down. So first thing, and we're going to get into how, like, the flow of the book, but what was your process? Because there are a lot of even your peers, so business owners, entrepreneurs, executives that are listening to this right now, and they're saying, I want to write a book too. I also want to get my story out there. I have some similar maybe backgrounds as Keith, and I haven't done it, and maybe now's a good time to do it. Like, what was your process? Because getting into creating a book can be intimidating. So how did you pull it off?
So that's a great question. And especially since I tried to write a book many times. And when I say many, I would say probably several dozen times. I would sit down. And I would write down my thoughts, and I would just start writing, and I'd get to maybe 3 to 5 pages. And then I would say, where do I go from here? And then I would just put it away, think about it, come back to it. And then I would think, okay, well, I'll add to it. And then it just didn't seem to flow, and it seemed like my thoughts were all over. And the more I wrote, the more I had ideas about other things I wanted to incorporate. So I thought there has to be a better way to approach this. And this time, I really felt compelled to write it for some reason. I don't know why this time I felt more compelled, but I thought, you know what, this time I'm going to do it. I'm just going to put my mind to it, and I'm going to have a pragmatic approach to it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to flesh out a bunch of different, chapters. What I'm going to do is figure I'm going to write a book that's, around 150 to 200 pages, because to me, I thought that would be impossible to reach. But I thought, you know what, I'm looking at other books in this. I read a lot of books myself, and I'm thinking, I want to kind of be in with the other people, share about the same amount of information. So how do I do it? So I took some time to write an outline of the things that I wanted to include in the book. And I wrote down basically the thoughts for different chapters. And I figured, hey, each chapter is going to be somewhere to around maybe, 8 to 15 pages. And I figured, all right, 200 pages, 10 chapters, 20 pages, maybe, somewhere, like I said, between 8 to 15. And so then I wrote down, roughly, about a dozen ideas, and figured, okay, now how do I incorporate this where it would actually flow from one thing to the next? And what is it overall that I'm trying to get across to people? It just started, the more I tried to get practical about it, the easier it became. And that's where eventually it clicked, and I thought, okay, I want to share the process of how people achieve great things. And I want to really give people something more than the 3 steps or the 4 steps, because it's just not that easy. There's a lot more that goes into it, and I want to really share, what the process is, not just for myself, but for other people who have achieved incredible things.
So I find one thing really unique about this book is that it's multidimensional. And what I mean by that is, it's not your typical business book. So meaning part of it's part autobiographical, it's part how-to, it's part telling a story. So if I had to do a combination of books, it could be Think and Grow Rich, it could be The Go-Getter, it could be 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, all wrapped in one book. So I found at least 3 very clear defined dimensions in the book itself, and the way it was connected. It all still flowed. It still read very well. It was logical. I want to focus a little bit on the personal side of it. So meaning, there's some people that want to write books too, and there's 2 different ways to do it. And there's one that's the way that you did it, which you made it very personal. So you told some things in the book that maybe some people wouldn't want to divulge, some of the, let's just say, not glamorous parts in their journey. You told them, and they're in the book. And to the readers, by the way, I'm not going to spoil the whole book for you, because I want you to go out and buy it. So we do sell books. So that being said, but you made it very personal also. So what kind of advice would you give to somebody in terms of, because I personally, just being honest, I haven't made my books very personal. I've written quite a few. What kind of advice would you give in terms of, or what was your thought process, I should say, around making that determination? Because you have enough, let's just say, nuts and bolts knowledge in helping, 200 plus tech companies and all the other things and accomplishments. You could have made it a very, nuts and bolts, basic, black and white, this is how you grow your business or something else. You could have went a lot of other directions, but instead you chose to make it very personal. Tell us a little bit more about that decision.
Sure. I thought about keeping it more sterile, if you will.
Good word.
But it doesn't really serve the purpose of what I was going for. For people who really want to achieve something remarkable, it takes a lot, and you really have to connect with yourself, and that's what it's really about. And I don't really think it's possible to just put out a very, follow the numbers kind of book. I think that people have to understand what the sacrifices, that are made along the way. And it's not just myself, it's other people. And that's why I segmented it into 3 sections, is to show, hey, it's not just me. You have to understand what other people go through as part of a journey, because this is what it is. It's a journey. And it's not through, it's through trial and error, but it doesn't need to be as much trial and error. And I wanted to kind of break it down so people could kind of see it from a different point of view and say, hey, this is somebody who did it, and it wasn't easy for them. And you know what? It's not easy for any of these other people, but yet they've all done it. And the people do incredible things every day, and somehow they do it. But these aren't people who are winning the lottery. These are people who are really going to work, putting in their time, dedicated, and clearly driven by something greater than themselves.
That's awesome. And yeah, I don't know if when I was talking about the dimensions, I don't know if I brought it up, but you even wove a love story in there. I was like, come on, Keith, how did you put a freaking love story in a business book? And it was good. Like, I'm not going to spoiler it, but at the end, I had that little, you watch a good movie and you're like at the very end and you're like, you get that little choked up feeling. I'm like, how the hell did you do that, Keith? I can't do that. Like, I haven't been able to pull that one off yet. You got a little bit more age than me. I'm going to work on that one. But I'm like, he put in a freaking script. I couldn't believe it.
Well, that was not intended. I mean, that's just the truth of what happened.
Wow.
When I share that story, I wasn't sharing that story really as being a love story, but the truth of the matter is that was
what's a love story?
And somebody, again, it's what drives people.
Yeah.
It's ultimately you have to, what is motivating people? Motivation is a huge thing. And I didn't want to, gloss over that. And everybody's motivation is different. And in the particular case that I shared, that was just part of that person journey.
That's awesome. Yeah, it was great. And definitely worth the read for that alone, actually. I was like, oh my gosh, this is good. And anybody that reads that part and they're like, and it hits them in that gut, or if they've been in a similar situation, for the more seasoned entrepreneurs out there, that's going to hit them hard. I loved it. It was great.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that I think that was an element that kept me engaged in that particular situation. I might not have, I'm sure you probably gathered that, but clearly that was part of my motivation to stay engaged in that situation. Otherwise, I might have just said, you're on your own. But
for sure,
everybody likes a happy ending.
All right. Well, well said. Let's dive further into the book. So I do want to get some of that done. So good, but I can talk to you all day long about your process. For the listeners, they know I can, because I got 100 more questions about that. But I do want to spend some time on the book. So I'd like to start kind of towards the beginning. So you share some of the earlier years and experiences with your father being a businessman and owning a business. I know a lot of people are affected by their upbringing, and they're obviously, everybody's affected by their family in one way, shape, or form. I know for myself, growing up, I didn't realize it till I got much older, where I was like, whoa, my dad was an entrepreneur my whole life. I didn't even realize that. And you kind of mentioned the whole ticket idea, which I also was brought up with. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that, that relationship with your father played into you being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of like driving by a car wreck. You have to look. And what I mean by that is the more you're told no, the more you're kind of drawn into it. And, my whole life is, drilled into me, that you need to have security, and security comes in the way of having a degree of some sort. And that was coming from my father's perceived experience. He never had a degree and never went to college. And so that was important to him. He had the best of intentions, but, hanging out with him and going to, all sorts of business meetings and seeing what he was doing was a lot more exciting than, being a, quote, professional. And so that was something that I was just around and found a lot more exciting. I tried to find that environment, with a degree, but it just didn't materialize. And the people that I was around encouraged me to go into business because they could see that I had that skill set. I think it's just, you have to stick with what you find interesting and exciting, and sometimes just doing something for the sake of doing it isn't satisfying. And so, I needed to satisfy that need that I had, and I tried to ignore it for a very long time, but inevitable, I had to face the music.
Yeah, and facing the music you did, can you kind of, and you do so well in kind of illustrating it in the book, and when I read it, I was like, again, one of those things, there's just so many points in this book that really just hits you in the gut. I'm like, because I remember my moment. Can you talk a little bit more about your moment, like when you knew that this was going to, you're like, this is the route I'm going, like I'm an entrepreneur, if I have no roof over my head, like this is just what I have to do. Could you give us a little bit more of that to transport us there, Keith?
Sure. Oddly enough, it's what most people, would never even imagine. It's equivalent to facing death is really what it is.
Yeah.
You're facing this moment that you just, as much as hard as difficult it is as if somebody's passing away, you have to accept the fact that they're gone. And you have to accept this fact that the path that you've been on is not your path. And it's overwhelming, just like somebody passing away. And it's very difficult. And there's a lot of reckoning and reasoning that you try to go through. You go through different stages, just like a death. And then, hopefully you come around and you decide I'm not going to live in denial and I'm going to embrace this. And it may be really challenging and it may be really scary, but I just don't see how I'm going to survive if I don't do this.
Yeah, I get it. And I've never heard anybody say it's like death, but yeah, you're right. for everybody hold on. So for all my listeners, Keith, that are listening to this for inspiration and so how they can become an entrepreneur, and it's so glamorous. Yeah, Keith just told you, the maker, participated in over $2 billion of transactions. Yeah, you want to be an entrepreneur? It's like death.
Well, in all fairness, I should have really finished that thought. It's actually, it's more than that. It's a death, but at the same time, it's a new birth. And,
absolutely.
And it's the new birth that you have to focus on. But it's very difficult to let go of the past. Like I said, it's scary, it's unknown. But, there's liberation and freedom, and that's what it really is. It's a moment where you realize that it's an opportunity to breathe free.
And I'm glad you finished the thought, because it really is a new birth, and birth is painful. There you go. So can you talk a little bit? Can you talk a little bit more about how age, if you believe it does, because you don't write about this in the book, but I was just curious on your thought on this when I was reading it, is how age kind of plays a factor or doesn't. I mean, it's going to be different for everyone, but I'd like to hear your thought process on it, because in my situation, so for you, when you made that decision in the book, you're pretty young, but for myself, when I made that decision to go the entrepreneurial route, I mean, I let's just say I had that ticket, so to speak, in terms of the job, the degrees, all the other stuff that you would have that my parents would have wanted. And I was, going on 14 years into my career when I left that to do something that people would say is, at the time would say was completely crazy. Man, maybe some people still think it's crazy, which is to be a media guy and to do what I do now. So does age play a factor in that? Or if so, how does it? I'm just curious, because I know there's some people listening right now that's on their head too. Maybe they're at their desk right now at their office and they're thinking, man, I got this thing that I've been wanting to do my whole life, but it's too late for me. Or the opposite. Oh, I'm just young. I'm just starting out of college, and I need more experience before I go down that route. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. The short answer is that age isn't really a factor. This is very much a mental moment to make this decision. And the way I would describe it now is very different than I would describe it if you had asked me at the time that I actually decided to go that route. But what I would say now, being a more mature person, is it's equivalent to an item on your bucket list. Something you have to do before you die. And, you have to decide, how long do I want to wait to go skydiving? How long do I want to wait before I'm going to go hike, a magnificent mountain or canyons? I want to go whitewater rafting. I want to, make love on the beach, whatever. It's something that you just feel compelled to do. And I would say that if you feel compelled to do it, then you should do it. Obviously you think, well, I've got all these reasons why I can't. I don't have the security, or what if I lose everything, or this or that. But the reality is there's no guarantees in life. There are plenty of people who go to work for major corporations who think that they've landed the job of their dreams. They're going to be there for 20 years. They're going to save their money diligently every month, and everything's going to be good. But life just doesn't work that way. As you get older and you see your friends, pass, and, what happens to people along the way, that's just an illusion. And we're told a lot of things that just, never materialize. And so I think that if you're honest with yourself and you say, this is something that I really feel compelled to do, then obviously the sooner the better. So I don't really think, like I said, that age is a factor. And I think that, look, if you start later, it may actually be easier because you have a lot more experience than when you first start out. But the biggest challenge in the whole process is yourself getting out of your way. Once you decide you're going to get out of your way, that's when it starts to become interesting.
Oh, man. Oh, so you say it so easily. It's so hard to get out of our ways, Keith. We're trying. But you're right. Once we get...
but you read the book, and it's not so easy for everybody. In fact, I don't think it's easy for anyone to get out of their way.
Oh, well said.
People have to understand, hey, you're not alone. That's why I made it personal. You're not alone. These are challenges everybody goes through. It's just a question of how you're going to handle it.
Perfect transition with where I was going next, Keith. So the rise and fall chapter. Oh, my gosh. Let me tell you, this one, it took me there because I obviously know you. I obviously known you in recent years, so I know the nowadays Keith. I didn't know the just getting started out Keith, the just getting it going Keith, and then the obviously the fall part of it earlier in your career. so the savings and loan crisis. So I've been a student of the market at least since I was 16 minimum. So I know about some of these things that, based off of reading them, but I didn't actually live them like you did. And as I was reading this, I was just trying to put myself into your shoes. And let's put it this way, for all the youngins that are going to read this book out there, there's references in here that I encourage you to. Obviously, you're going to read this book, but I encourage you to Google them, look it up. And also, you talk a lot about Michael Jordan in this book, which I always love. And I was thinking about this as I was reading that part too. And I'm like, not everybody reading this, depending on the age, knows the greatness of Michael Jordan. So I was excited for you to get this into print because they had LeBron. So I'm like, so that's another thing that I have to get out in this early in the interview. And we're going to talk about this some more later in our interview, Keith. But if you don't know the greatness of Michael Jordan, go look at some highlight reels on YouTube right now. You can pause this. You have my permission. Come right back to it. All right, Keith. So let me get back on track. So, the rise and fall chapter. I mean, how sharing this part of it was when I felt that I got to really know you and Keith and that just getting started, Keith. So tell us a little bit more about kind of the inspiration for sharing this.
Oh, wow. It's, you just can't imagine what things are going to be like. It's equivalent to somebody telling you, if you put your hand on a stove, you're going to burn your hand. You just don't understand what that pain is like. It's impossible to imagine. I had no idea what I was headed into, what was going to happen, and what it would be like, how it was going to really challenge me, and many, many other people. And, it's equivalent to what's going on now. I mean, we're not hearing, unfortunately, about these types of stories right now. But you will be hearing them in the coming months because there are countless people who are experiencing unprecedented challenges and, their faith is being tested. It's a tremendous challenge. And, it's something that I just felt it was timely. There have been other times, where everything's going great, but it's challenging times where I feel it's even more important to share. And, look, had I known that was ahead of me, I probably wouldn't have signed up. I probably would have, chosen to maybe do something different. But, I had to follow what I felt was, my path, just like Michael Jordan. And other people, you find yourselves in really challenging times, and it's a period of reflection that's almost too much to handle, but it really gives you an opportunity to really understand yourself, and it's a great opportunity to understand, your personality, what drives you. I utilized that to try to solve a problem, which was an economics problem, but I really learned more about myself than anything else, which, helped me as time passed.
So in the book, and one of the things I like about your writing style is that a lot of the lessons were not necessarily explicit, but they were implicit. And so I gained a lot out of even you telling your story, and you wove into it some of the habits you've built and some other things, and at the same time kind of served as a historian for the area, in my opinion, which is very interesting for anybody kind of that's reading this from the outside looking in. It reminds me of kind of like some of those movies or Netflix series that are very LA. So you talk about things like going to get your lunch at La Scala was Wednesday, and you have all these other things, El Pastel, like all these places you ate, and driving up the hill and down the hill and dropping the kids off at school, and you wove into it a lot of things that are really super LA that I'm like, oh my gosh, if you're watching this in a movie, you'd be like, okay, I've been there, done that, like you can see it. But the habits that were in there, I thought the way that you kind of you explained those and you went over once or twice maybe so that people kind of saw them. I think, some of these things where, it's a question, would you attribute some of these habits that you built to some of the success you had even during these hard periods of time?
That's a really good question. And my initial response would be probably no. Look, I'm a very analytical person, as if you'll find it when you read the book. And so it's just kind of my thought process of, numbers and probability. And in large part, we create habits to create certainty, or perceived certainty. So in other words, you want to make sure you get up every morning at a certain time. You want to go to the gym. You want to work so many hours. And I talk about all this in the book. And I think that, we do that to try to create some certainty to try to get a certain result. And I just felt that, well, I don't want to ruin the book, but I do talk about when I started off in business, in real estate, what my experience was. And that was proof to me that you just need to do the work. So, I think that it's your belief system. And if you believe that, you need to do this, or you believe you need to have a cup of coffee at 10:15 every day, it's just what you believe. And, we're creatures of habit. So, I think that's, we just develop these work processes or habits or whatever you want to call them. And it's kind of innate to a certain degree. Some of it's innate and then some of it's learned.
Oh, I'll tell you that story that you share about your first 4 phone calls. Are you kidding me, Keith? I was reading that and I'm like, what the heck? Like, are you kidding me? 4 phone calls and that was your result? I couldn't take it. I was like, that's crazy.
It is. But, so is everything that followed.
Fact. All right, well said. I'll give you that one. But I was...
yeah.
Well said.
There's right? There's life is multidimensional. So, you got that in one dimension and then you have the other stuff in the other dimensions. So, yeah.
Fantastic. So there's a theme that kind of falls into that chapter, but it also is woven throughout multiple chapters in the book. And really, I know you even passed I didn't know you that time, but I know you passed the time of writing this book in terms of context and even today. And one thing that I noticed that I thought was really interesting was that some people talk about reading and some people, and, they read a book a week or all these other things. And I've done it for a long time, but it seems to me like the importance of reading and getting new ideas for yourself is probably at a whole nother level. Like you always went back to books. You always went back to bookstores at these pivotal moments in your life to get new tools. So you're not somebody, and just throwing this out there, so this is your first book. So for me, when I say it might not sound as good because I publish books and sell them, and I mean, that's my business. For you, you're doing this, to share with everyone. But number one, number two, you've also benefited from many books like the one that you've written for others. So I see that pay it forward in your work and what you're doing. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of reading and how you've used that kind of in your life to tool up, so to speak?
Sure. So, I talk about this considerably in the book, and I think the most important thing to mention is I hated reading. I despised reading.
That was funny. That was so funny.
That is an understatement. And
so funny.
I think that is, of huge importance to share that with people, because I think people find reading intimidating. They find it boring. They find it a lot of things that are very negative, which was my experience growing up. And that's really what I wanted to share first and foremost is, how much I despised reading. And I wanted to share how that changed and, what the result was and how I view it and why it's something that you should really consider. And there's a way I wanted to share specifically the details of it so that somebody could put themselves, in a situation to understand and say, you know what, I'm willing to give this a try. And just like I was willing to give it a try and be more open to it and understand, how beneficial it can really be.
Yeah, and I didn't really understand how much you dislike reading, because I knew you for being a reader and always like digesting ideas, but I didn't really understand how much you didn't like it until, and I have to give a shout out. You mentioned multiple books in there, but have to give a shout out to Uncle Tony. You mentioned Awaken the Giant Within, and you deliberately say, I didn't want to really read this book, or you say something like that. I'm paraphrasing it, but I'll do at least 10 pages a day, and I'm like, or something like that, and I was cracking up because I'm like, oh, he really doesn't like reading, but he knows it's necessary. You had me dying laughing with that one.
Well, I don't know if necessary, at the time, I don't know that necessary would have been the best, would have been the most descriptive word for it. But, I was out of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So, I had to try anything. I was trying all sorts of things. And I figured, all right, I'm going to give it a shot, and I'll again, like me, designing the book into so many chapters, I did the same approach with reading. Look, I'll read so much, and hopefully I'll get through it.
Yeah, you had me dying. I also laughed at your process for it. So, judging. I've heard of. So I think everybody listening has heard this axiom. So you never judge a book by its cover, right? Well, come on, Keith. You never judge a book by its thickness, really? You were killing me.
But I did.
It's like the book's too thick. I'm not doing it.
Right. Well, because my feeling is like if you can't explain it quickly, then there's you're just trying to sell a book or something. I don't know, but I want it short and sweet. I want cliff notes. I don't want to read anything.
Oh man.
But I mean, look, I think to anybody who reads the book with regards to what I talk about reading, I mean, to them, I would think it would be comical. I mean, to me, the process was painful. But I think as an outside person listening to me describe the story, it's probably funny to, a large extent, I would think.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm laughing. I'm still laughing thinking about it. So, yeah, it's hilarious. Even hearing you say it now is hilarious. This book's too thick. Let's switch it up a bit. So I do want to focus on a couple more areas. And so the greatest hurdle. So this chapter was, it had all of these things are uniquely you, I would say. So you talk about things like planning, values, beliefs. You talk about a lot of different things in this chapter and kind of in this section that build up to it. But that being said, one of the things that I found like really unique about your book that I've read hundreds of books because let me preface this. Unlike you, I've always loved reading, and I know why I've always loved it is I've always associated it with money. My parents, when I was a kid, that's how I got allowance. So chores, you had to do chores. But every week, if I wanted my allowance, I had to have a book read, and I had to give my dad a book report. Whether or not he ever read those, I don't know. But somehow that linked that whole thing in my head to where I always associated money with books and reading books as getting more money. So I love reading. But that being said, in all the business books I've read, I haven't really seen too many books that were, or if any off the top of my head that I can remember, that actually get into the idea of destiny. So you add some of the planning, the values, the beliefs, all these other things into it, but the idea of destiny and how that plays a role in your overall success. Can you tell me more about your views on destiny and kind of how you and why you incorporated that into this work?
Sure. I think, for people who are listening, you're a little bit of a disadvantage because obviously when you read the book, it becomes clearer. But, belief systems are powerful. And, people, believe all sorts of things, and you can't change their minds. Somebody may believe that, they're meant to be a doctor, or somebody may believe that they're going to win the lottery, or somebody, may believe that they're going to be the president of the United States. And they have these beliefs, and they perceive that as their destiny, and that is a driving factor for them. And a lot of people ignore these thoughts. They think, it's just a thought. But there are other people who really believe it at their core at an early age. I mean, there are many people who say, since I was, 7 years old, I remember I wanted to be an actor, or I wanted to be a dentist or a pediatrician or whatever. And so, I think that it's very important to acknowledge that everybody has these thoughts and these ideas. And to some people, it's just a thought or an idea, but to other people, they firmly believe that is their destiny. And I think that, that deep down, and I go through in the book and break it down so people understand, why, they can understand why it's their destiny, and they can understand how to get there. So I think it's very important. Not everybody has those moments where they feel like this is my destiny, but a lot of people do, and I think it's important to be in touch with yourself and to spend time to really, explore those thoughts and ideas, and to see whether or not they're really your destiny or not. And that's what the book in large part is about, is going through that process.
Yeah, and again, I agree with you that the reader is that the listener here is at a little bit of a disadvantage because of because they haven't read the book yet. Which, by the way, go out and get that book. Really easy to find, and we're going to have links in the show notes for this. So just don't forget to grab that, and also to learn more, go to KeithHerman.com, which we're going to have links in the show notes for that also. But I do want to stick on this concept of destiny a little bit longer, and the reason why is because I think when most people think of destiny, especially business people that are very analytical, because I want to frame this back so that people remember who you are from the bio, because we've been talking for a little bit now. So just to put this in perspective, and Keith talks about this in the book also, but he lives on Excel. So Keith is an Excel guy. He's nuts and bolts. He's, it's by the numbers. Even as your answer to my previous question, Keith, do you think habits played a role? You're like, no, I didn't expect you to say no. And then you said you're more of a probability guy, and you're looking at it. And even back then, you were talking about, and you said this probably 2 or 3 times in the book at different portions. You said, I'm a disciplined investor, something along those lines. And I'm a disciplined investor. So you always go back to the numbers. So I think the fact that you wrote about destiny is possibly a little bit different than maybe somebody who is, and I fit in this camp too, by the way, so I'm not picking anybody out there for whoever's listening, but the law of attraction and other things, which we're going to get into your idea of alignments and things like and alignment and other things in one of our upcoming episodes in this series, because I do want to get into your views on that. But the idea of destiny coming from you is slightly different. It's not this like pie in the sky type thing. So how does somebody that, let's just say, with your background, somebody that's listening to this right now, that's typically been, very nuts and bolts, and not like they live on the end, I'll just stereotype, the engineer type. They live on Excel, and maybe they haven't necessarily been open to the idea of destiny, but now they're listening to this right now, and they got a guy that's just like them, that's a numbers guy, that's a lives on Excel guy, and now he's talking about destiny. I think that might be a little shaking them just slightly. What would you tell to that person that's listening to this that hasn't really been necessarily open to that idea in the past?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, I would say that Excel and analytics and everything else are just tools that you use to realize your destiny. That's how I see it. But you have to start off, you have to start off with a thought or an idea, right? And that thought or that idea may just come to you organically. It may be something that, like I said, I want to be president. And you have that thought and you say, you know what, I really believe this. That is my destiny. How do I get there? Well, I have to maybe go to law school. I have to become a senator or a congressman or whatever. And, you know, along the way, you know, you may get a degree, you may, you may go into the military. I mean, there's a lot of things that you may do which are necessary for you to get to where you're going, and using tools are a part of that. And being analytical is great, but it may not get you to where you ultimately want to go. I mean, they're just tools. It's like using tools to put together a car to drive somewhere, right? They get you where you're going, but it's not. You could also buy a car and not utilize them. So I mean, they're helpful and useful, but they're not the key components of what you really need. So that's why, while I think that they're important, I don't want to place too much emphasis on them and say I have to live and die by the numbers, because you have to look at something, the greater picture and from a larger point of view.
Yeah, that's awesome, and well said. And I think that for the right people that need to hear that right now, that are placing too much of an emphasis maybe on the tool part of it, I think that that's exactly what they need to hear at the exact right time. So that's awesome. So Keith, looks like I tell you, this time flies by talking to you, and it looks like we're about out of time for this episode. But we're going to, just for everybody listening, I want you to make sure to tune in to part 2 of this interview, which should be right after this one. Definitely check it out. We have a whole lot to cover still, so we're going to get into mystic money. We're going to get into mapping and mastering your success. We're going to get into a little bit of this love story that we talk about, that Keith wrote about, of Tomas and Elena. Oh my gosh, it's a love story. It's an entrepreneur story. It has its ups, it has its downs, it has everything in between. I was like, Keith, come on, are you making this up? Did this really happen? It was that freaking good. I'm like, did you get the script off of somebody's desk? Because it read just like I said, like a Netflix series or something. It was definitely a bingeable portion of the book, like many of the portions were. So Keith, again, thank you for coming on today, and to the listeners, thank you for tuning in. Hope you got a lot of value out of this. If you did, don't forget, subscribe to the podcast, leave me a review on the Apple iTunes Store, and if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, Mission Matters Business, definitely give us a subscribe there, but also leave us some comments on the video. Love to know what kind of projects and things that you're working on. And Keith, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, and I hope everybody enjoys the book.